Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breeze Time with Kathy. I'm so glad to be with you. As you know, I'm on once a week now for Breeze Time, 9 a.m. on Tuesdays. My worship service is supposed to still come on at 11 o'clock on Sunday, and then it is rerun at 11 on Wednesday. So, I'm just glad to talk with you again. If you remember last time, I was telling you how Chuck and I built his dream workshop. And the plan is that we'd go ahead and sell our house and move in with my mother. And we'd stay temporarily in his workshop and while Chuck built the addition. And the addition was going to take about 18 months, and believe it or not, that's about how long it took. So everything kind of went according to plan. He had planned for this nice big workshop area, and it was, of course, 20 feet tall at the peak, if you remember. And we didn't have a kitchen, but we did have an office. He had an office in his dream workshop. Of course, every man has to have an office. And it was big enough for our bed and a dresser and a couple of nightstands, but that was just about it. And of course it was air conditioned, and it also had a bathroom. But I have to admit, things moved a little faster. We found a buyer for the house a lot sooner than we expected to, and we had to move out as soon as the office was finished. As soon as the shop was finished, but before the office was done. So basically, he moved. He said, "This is where my office is going to be, and here's all the stubs and the slab for the plumbing for where the bathroom's going to be." And he put my bed, he put our bed there and our dresser, and of course we had to have TV. He ran cable back to our, I don't think we had cable, I just think we had regular news, which we didn't watch a lot of TV in the office. We did have a TV antenna. That's right, and so we did watch regular TV. We had one sitting on top of the dresser, but we had air conditioning. Eventually, but in the beginning, it was this big, huge, giant warehouse-looking thing. Remember, it's 20 feet. It's 40 by 60. It's 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, 30 feet wide, or 40 feet wide. 40 by 60, I think it was. Yeah, 40 by 60 is what it was. And his office, including the bathroom, was 20 by 20, I guess. Maybe a little bit bigger. But anyway, the dimensions don't matter. But so here I am in this big, huge space. And he tells me, "Don't worry, I'm going to build the walls around it. I'll build the walls and I'll build the roof," because he wanted storage up above his office. So that took up a third of basically his shop. And the other 2/3, the other 40 feet was all open work area. But when he moved it in, there were no walls. There was no bathroom. There's just stubs for the plumbing. And so what he did was he moved the bed in, the dresser, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll build everything. In the meantime, we'll sort of we'll do it like we're camping out." And I said, "Yeah, but I need a bathroom at night." And so he said, "Well, I put a 5-gallon bucket over there. One of those big paint buckets." Duh. And that's what he did, and that's what I used. But bless his heart, he just worked so hard. And believe it or not, the whole office was finished and air conditioned and paneled within about 2 weeks. And he did put in the bathroom. And yes, we had a toilet and a bed and a shower and a sink and everything. We had air conditioning. It was terrific. It wasn't room to hang my clothes inside, but then right outside in the shop, he put a bar all the way across the side, and that's where I had all my clothes hanging. My clothes hung in the shop. There was a refrigerator in the shop. He even put a washer and dryer in the shop, because after all, in your dream shop, you have to be able to wash your work clothes there, because they get pretty dirty. Why bring them up to the house? My husband had more stuff and it was just amazing that he did all these things. But there it was, 2 weeks later, I had a room around me. And as I said, and so we managed. Now, we used to go up to my mother's, of course. We'd go up to my mother's every day, and every evening we would sit there with her and watch TV. We'd eat dinner and we'd watch TV, and then at about 10 o'clock, I had to get up early in the morning. At that time, I was working at the hospital. I was a nurse educator at that time, so I had a 9 to 5, 8 to 4:30 job, 9 to 5, and then after that I became a director, and same thing, office hours. So, I kind of wanted to go back to the house and settle down around 10 o'clock. Well, in Central Time Zone, which is what New Orleans is, Belle Chase is where we lived, that's when the news comes on. The news comes on at 10 o'clock, okay? And Chuck was a real news fanatic. I mean, given his druthers, he would leave. He was one of those people who would leave either the Weather Channel or the News Channel on all the time, and it would go and go and go. When we had cable, but he really liked to watch the local news at 10 o'clock at night. Well, we could get it back in the shop, but the reception, of course, wasn't as good as my mother, who had cable. So anyway, I can remember I used to, every time around 10 o'clock, before the news, right as the news was getting ready to come on, I'd want to go back. I'd say, "Come on, hon, let's go back to let's go back to the shop. Let's go back to our room." And he'd say, "Well, I want to watch the news," and I'd kind of grumble and sit. So finally, one time when I said, "Oh, come on, let's go back," and he said, No. He says, the snakes come out at 10 o'clock from 10 to 10:30. You don't want to walk back there by yourself. I told him I was going to go back by myself. He said, "No, you don't want to do that. The snakes come out at 10 o'clock. Now, if you were remembering from last week, I told you how I have a phobia about snakes, and he knew that. The 10 o'clock snakes. It became quite a joke between us. But I have to admit, after he made that joke, it was a lot easier to wait till 10:30 and just go on back to the shop after that and go to bed, Of course, we didn't go to sleep right away. We'd sit up. He liked to read. In those days, that was before I had my call to ministry. In those days, I was doing art. I was painting. And drawing, and I was taking classes, and it was a whole. I think I did one on that. But I'm the kind of person, I never dreamed I had any ability, and I'd only started taking lessons when we decided to give up our home, and I had this beautiful backyard, and we decided to sell. And it was so beautifully landscaped, and it was a gorgeous garden we had put in, and everything was wonderful. And I tried to take pictures of it. But of course, when the roses looked wonderful, the marigolds weren't blooming, or the crepe myrtle wasn't blooming. Your mind beautifies something like this, and it remembers it all perfect. But the camera sees it as it is. That's why I always look fat in pictures, Not when I look in them. Not fatter when I look at pictures than when I look in the mirror. Isn't that terrible? But it's what our mind's eye does. And so I decided, even though I'd never painted Monet, there was this Monet exhibit at the New Orleans Museum of Art, and I thought, that doesn't look that hard. If I knew a little bit about paints, maybe I could just paint something with the colors and the layout that reminds me of my backyard. It doesn't have to be great. And I think I talked about that. But anyway, I was painting, and my painting had I found that I was a real detailed-oriented painter, not loose and impressionistic like Monet at all. I couldn't do that. It's kind of strange, but I couldn't. It just didn't work for me. It's funny how you get wired. You're wired in a certain way. And anyway, I went ahead and I was doing that at the time. And I painted several pictures while we were there. But one of the ones that I painted, I'd like to share with you right now, was I decided I would try a portrait. And I decided that I would paint Chuck. Why not? We were sitting in bed. I had the canvas on my lap, and I was painting, and Chuck's sitting right next to me, so I painted a picture of Chuck. It's far from perfect, but I'll go ahead and share it with you anyway. It actually, most people can recognize that it's Chuck. So this is the painting I did of Chuck. Imagine me sitting in bed. We were sitting in bed every evening. Well, and he would be reading. He liked to read. And I would have the canvas on my knees or in my lap. And there I'd be sitting next to him. And I was painting. So I decided to paint a picture of him. And here it is. That's Chuck. Now, I know I'm not a great painter, and that is not a perfect likeness. I always thought the ears were too big, but to tell you the truth, he said that he thought it must be pretty good because they kind of looked like his dad. They looked like his dad, and because his dad had really big ears. So anyway, I went ahead and painted this. He talked about how he was when a boy. They had an Aladdin lamp, so that's supposed to be an Aladdin lamp in there. Some kind of fancy kerosene lamp that they used to use. But that's how I painted him. And as you can see, he slept on the right and I slept on the left. The left side of the bed was mine. You can tell just by looking at that. So. I mean, I have to admit, living in that shed, at least got a few things done, and that was one of them. I painted several pictures, but this is the one that I'm most associated with when we lived in his workshop. Well, we had other things while we were living back there in the shop. Remember, I guess we lived there almost 2 years while Chuck built the addition to the house. And my mom's house was 1,200 square feet, and Chuck built a 2-story, 2,000 square foot addition to the house. We had double fireplaces upstairs and downstairs, and it was really wonderful, actually. He had a big porch across the back. Was really, really nice. And my sister lives in that house now. But anyway, moving on. So here we are, we're living in the shop, and it's just the way things are. I'm managing quite well. Chuck's making progress on the house every day. Has become, well, no, he's still working as a police officer, and yes, he's still doing heating and air conditioning work, but other than that, he's working on the house. My husband was a busy man. He really was. He had a lot of energy. And I can even remember there was a point which my mom told me, and remember, Chuck's 25 years older than I was. And she said, Kathy, you'll just exhaust yourself if you try to keep up with Chuck. And he really was. Chuck was somebody who could get by on just 6 hours of sleep. That he'd always had 4 or 5 hours of sleep, he said. He said one of the worst things about basic training was they made you lay in your bunk for like 8 or 10 hours, and you couldn't get up. He said he never had slept that long in his life. Even as a boy, he only slept about 5 or 6 hours. So he says, I know it's the way it was when we were together. Well, Chuck worked a lot of night details as a police officer. That's one way they pick up extra money. And he also did his heating and air conditioning jobs. But so he was gone sometimes. One thing about Chuck, though, is he snored, okay? He had the worst snore. And, oh, he was loud. It was like, talk about sawing wood. So I have to admit that I had learned I tried earplugs and it wasn't helpful. But what did work for me was white noise. So what I would do when Chuck was home, I would run the fan on the air conditioner all the time, and the fan would provide the white noise I needed. Well, I guess it was fall, and Chuck was working at night, and and this worked pretty well, though it aggravated Chuck that I would run the fan because he said that wasn't good for the air conditioning. I don't understand something about blowing the coils and whatever. But anyway, it's what I did, and he put up with me. After all, I put up with his 10 o'clock snakes. So, marriage is give and take. Anyway, so I remember that he was gone sometimes at night. It was kind of, remember I told you that we built his shop in the woods, kind of back on my mother's property. She had a couple of acres, and it was a good, couple of 100 yards from the house. 100 yards or so from the house through a drive that went through the woods to get to the shop. He liked it that way with his privacy back there. And anyway, he was gone one night. And I heard something hitting the metal building. Was somebody throwing rocks, I thought. Somebody's throwing rocks at the shed. So I'm trying to look out the window, and I'm trying to see. I don't see anybody, but somebody's throwing rocks. Somebody's throwing rocks at the shed. And it really bothers me, and I told Chuck, and he said, well, and I thought, well, maybe not. But then when on nights Chuck was there, it wouldn't happen. It only happened when Chuck was away. So finally I said, honey, something is wrong. People are throwing rocks at. He says, well, it never happens when I'm home. I guess they know when you're home. They see the big police car parked in the yard. I don't know why they bother me when you're gone, but they sure do. And all of a sudden, we're talking. We haven't gone to bed yet. And I heard it. I said, there it is. He said, Kathy. He said, we're under a live oak tree. Those are acorns hitting the metal building. Here I terrified myself out of my wits. But they were just acorns falling on the metal roof. You see, when Chuck was home, I ran that silly fan for white noise, and I didn't hear the acorns hit the building. And it hadn't been doing it all summer because acorns only fall in the fall. It's amazing how you can I worked myself up over this. It was silly. It really was. Well, we had some interesting things happen there. I think one of the kind of neat things that happened was Chuck had skylights in the big large part of his workshop. And remember, it was a slant roof, not a big slant, but about that big. And he had one of those big sliding doors that could open up. And he usually had the door open. Well, one day I noticed a bird stuck in there. Chuck and I noticed the little bird stuck in there. It looked like a young bird. And he was trying to fly out through the skylight. And of course that's where you could see light, but of course you couldn't get through. So then another bird, and we finally figured out it was probably his mother, this is a true story, would fly in, sit next to him, chirp, 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 then fly out through the door. And then she'd fly back in, and he'd still trying to go out through the skylight and bump himself on the skylight and keep trying to jump up and to the skylight. And she flew in, and she chirp, 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 and she flew out, and she flew in. And this went on for like an hour or so. She's trying to get the bird out. So Chuck and I decide we'll help. So we get brooms, and we try to shoo the little bird, and of course he freaks out and he's flying, fluttering all over the place. But finally we get him out. You know? And the mom, even though we were working there flying the brooms, I think she figured out what we were doing, because she was still coming to him and trying to lead him out, and we're trying to shoo him. And finally he went out. And she flew off, and he followed her out the door. Well, it's kind of funny, because then, about 5 minutes later, where Chuck and I are sitting there, and I promise you, it looked like the same bird. She flew back, and she sat on the limb, and she sang to us. I always felt like it was kind of like a thank you. It's pretty amazing, the instincts that mother bird had. She kept trying to lead the little bird out, lead her fledgling out. But he couldn't understand that in order to go up and out and out and up, he was going to have to first go down. He was going to have to trust his mother to go in the direction that didn't seem logical. You wonder where I get my material for my sermons sometimes. It's life, friends. It's all around us. It's so easy for me to see how God works with us and is patient with us. We get in our own heads what direction we're supposed to take. Oh, yeah, we're supposed to go up right through that sky. Ooh, hit my head, boom, hit my head, boom, bang my head against it, and yet keep trying. Even though there's another way being offered to me again and again and again. It took me years to realize what God was trying to tell me. I got there eventually. But I beat my head against the skyline a bunch of times before I finally figured I just had to trust and follow. It worked out for me. I hope it works out for you too. I hope and pray that the times in your life when you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, somehow a door or a way opens. Because the good thing is, just like that mother bird who didn't give up on that baby, on that fledgling, God never gives up on us. And He's going to keep trying. Just like she did. Well, until next time, God bless you.